Good morning, students. Now, let us resume our discussion on Phantomina by Eliza Haywood. In my last lecture, that is lecture number 3 on Phantomina, I have discussed about the situation where we find that the lady is assuming the role of a maid servant naming Celia and engaged in a kind of a relationship with Beauplessis, the central character of this particular text. Now let us begin from the next paragraph. His stay, that is, it is referring to Beauplessis' staying at birth, exceeded not a month, but in the time his supposed country, or country lass, had persecuted him so much with her fondness. This country lass is referring to Celia, obviously, that in spite of the eagerness with which he first enjoyed her, he was at last grown more wary of her. So there is a particular kind of a reference concerning the repeated kind of physical relationships between Beauplessis and Celia during his staying at Bath. So, which he first enjoyed her, and then he was at last grown wary of her than he had been of Phantomina, which she perceiving. So Phantomina, now she can identify that now the temperament of this man, that is Beauplessis, is gradually lacking. So which she perceiving would not be troublesome, but quitting her service. So Phantomina can identify, yes, this particular attire will not suit me or will not be fruitful for me in the future acquaintances. So, but quitting her service, remained privately in the town till she heard he was on his return. That means she was waiting, you see, that she had quitted from her service, that is, quitting her service. She remained privately in the town till she heard he was on his return, and in that time provided herself of another disguise. So it is the third disguise that she is assuming to carry on a third plot which her inventing brain had furnished her with, once more to renew his twice decayed ardors. You know what twice decayed ardors? Because the first case is concerning Phantomina, the second one is relating to Celia, and so these are the twice ardors, so twice decayed ardors that have been mentioned. And the dress she had adored to be made, now it is the third form of disguise, a third kind of it is the third time that she is preparing for another kind of a disguise. The dress she had ordered to be made was such as widows. So this is the third time she is assuming another role, and you will find that the primary focus for these things, it is quite similar. So such as widows were in their first morning. That means just after the death of her husband, the widows wear this particular kind of an attire, this particular kind of say garments or raiments she is preparing, which together with the most afflicted and penitential countenance that ever was seen. So that means when the first form of mourning, just after the death of her husband, the penitential countenance, it's the facial expression, and penitentiary perspectives are related to the mourning, that is the ritualistic formations of mourning. So the penitential countenance that ever was seen was no small alteration to her, who used to seem all gaiety. To add to this, her hair, which she was accustomed to wear very loose, the particular pattern of the hair has been changed, both when Phantomina and Celia was not tied back so straight, and her peaners means the cap, or the hanging flaps thereof, worn by women of high social standing. So, and her peaners coming so very forward that there was none of it to be seen. That means in the previous two cases, you will find that the hairs, they were very loose, but now it had been tied back to straight, or so straight that her peaners coming so very forward that there was none of it to be seen. So these are actually referring to the particular patterns of disguises that this lady, okay, or maybe Phantomina, is using at this moment. In fine, her habit and her air, that means the habits, and the air means the appearance, obviously, and the habits and the temperament were so much changed that she was not more difficult to be known in the rude country girl than she was now in the sorrowful widow. So ultimately, the matter of disguise is at the primary focus here. So ultimately, she is doing everything so that Beauplessis cannot recognize her. She knew that Beauplessis came alone in his chariot. That means when Beauplessis was returning from birth, he will come alone in his chariot. She knows everything, you see. Chariot, you know, it is the lightweight four-wheeled carriage, okay, which sits in the back only. That means at the front side there was the person who is actually driving the chariot. She knew that Beauplessis came alone in his chariot to the birth, and in the time of her being servant in the house where he lodged, heard nothing of anybody that was to accompany him to London. So ultimately, she was oversure that when Beauplessis will return from Bath to London, she will be alone in his chariot again, and hoped he would return in the same manner he had gone. She therefore hired a horses and a man to attend her to an inn about 10 miles on the side this side Bath. Okay, so what she did, she hired horses, number one, and she hired some men or a man to attend her to an inn about 10 miles on this side of Bath, where having discharged them, she waited till the chariot should come by. So she was waiting for Beauplessis to come, which when it did, and she saw that he was alone in it, she called to him that drove it to stop a moment, and going to the door, saluted the master with these words. What she said to Beauplessis? She said, "The distressed and wretched, sir, never fail to excite compassion in a generous mind." So these are some words, you see, that can provoke Beauplessis to help or make an aid to the lady. She said, "The distressed and wretched, sir," said she, "never fail to excite compassion in a generous mind." That means I can identify that you are a person of generous nature. And I hope I am not deceived in my opinion that yours is such. That means I am of generous kind, and I have thought about the people who are also generous, and I consider that you are no exception. That means the generosity is always present within you. I can identify that. You have the appearance of a gentleman, and cannot, when you hear my story, refuse that assistance which is in your power to give to an unhappy woman who, without it, may be rendered the most miserable of all created beings. So these are the words that I ultimately she is telling Beauplessis, that my story, it is so much adorned in uh, unhappiness. So ultimately, if you listen to my story, the unhappy story, then ultimately you must show pity on me, and if not, then I will be completely be in a miserable situation, you see. So ultimately, I am begging some pity, I am begging some feeling for me from you. So it would not be very easy to represent the surprise. So it actually surprised Buplessis that a lady from a respectable family, as it appears, she is standing in a beside the way, beside the path, and completely alone, completely lonely. What might have been the situation that actually laid the lady in such a condition? Duplessis thought. So it was something surprising. So, or an address. So these kinds of address have not been made generally. So, or an address created in the mind of him to whom it was made. She had not the appearance of one who wanted charity. So it was not kind of a charity or a person, a kind of a beggar, or maybe these kinds of persons who are in want of charity. The lady was not looking like that. And what other favor she required, he couldn't conceive, but telling her she might command anything in his power, gave her encouragement to declare herself in this manner. "You may judge," resumed she, "by the melancholy garb, that is clothing, I am in." That means, now the lady continues. She says to Buplasi, she tells Buplasi that the melancholic clothing that I am using, I am putting on at this moment, it can make you feel that I am in a particular kind of a situation. A kind of a lament is being oriented with me. So you may judge by the melancholy gerb I mean that I have lately lost all that ought to be valuable to womankind. And what is valuable to womankind? Obviously, it is referring to her husband. So I have lately lost all that ought to be valuable to womankind. But it is impossible for you to guess the greatness of my misfortune. So you cannot identify, you cannot just guess the greatness of my misfortune unless you had known my husband, who was master of every perfection to endear him to wife's affections. That means I was very lovable to my husband, and he was very lovable to me. So he was a perfect man, and ultimately I always feel for him. But notwithstanding, I look on myself as the most unhappy of my sex in outliving him. That means, in spite of all these things, notwithstanding, it is Shakespearean coinage, and it means in spite of. That means, despite her feeling for her husband, despite the kind of a warm relationship between them, I look on myself as the most unhappy of my sex. That means unhappy female in outliving him. I must. So it is the story that she is creating regarding the relations between the husband and wife, regarding the death of the husband, and regarding the feelings and what she is feeling at this moment, what actually happens in her family. Okay, they're the kinsmen, how they're duped her, and they have duped her, and ultimately what are the urgent situations that she has to go to London at any cost. So this is the story that she is creating. Okay, so that's why it says that I must so far obey the dictates of my discretion as to take care of the little fortune he left behind him. That means after the death of my husband, I had been, or I have been, uh, you know, playing some roles regarding my fortunes and taking care of my little fortunes that he left behind him, which being in the hands of a brother of his in London. Now, that is the situations ultimately, because that in a particular kind of a situation, a particular kind of a society where the male persons are governing, you will find that the regarding monetary effects or monetary benefits or maybe property related matters, there are multiple things that have been vested on simple the male relatives. So here it says that which being in the hands of a brother of his in London will be all carried off to Holland. So that is a very problem because the brother is actually going to Holland where he is going to settle. If I reach not the town before he leaves it, I am undone forever. So ultimately I have to arrive at London before he sets sail for Holland. Okay. So if I reach not the town before he leaves it, I am undone forever. To which end I left Bristol. So I was living in Bristol, and from Bristol I have come to this particular place, the place where I lived, hoping to get a place in a stage at birth, but they were all taken up before I came. And being by a hurt I got in a fall, rendered incapable of traveling any long journey on horseback. So it is not possible for me. The physical conditions actually, these are physical and mental conditions. These are to some extent dissuading me from committing another journey on horseback. So I have no way to go to London. So I don't have any particular provision to go to London, and must be inevitably ruined in the loss of all I have on earth without you. So if you do not help me, then ultimately I will be completely ruined. So without you have good nature enough to admit me to take part of your chariot. So that is the fundamental question. That is the fundamental focus. She was scheming, she was plotting against her. And that means she has to enter under disguise in the chariot of Beauplaisir here. So this is the story that I have already discussed. And here the famed widow ended her sorrowful tale. So which had been several times interrupted by a parenthesis of sighs and groans. You see, these are somehow why Eliza Haywood is actually referring to these things, the parenthesis of sighs and groans, because these are actually focusing on the kind of, lamentable situation that she was in. okay, the feeling and the temperament of this lady. And everybody will find that somehow these can arouse some fetishes within this man, like Buplasi. Okay, the emotional exuberance and ecstasy can lead him into thinking something extra. You know what is the thought? The thought of being copulated with her. So obviously, so here the famed widow ended her sorrowful tale, which had been several times interrupted by parentheses of sighs and groans, and Beauplessis, with a complacent and tender ear, assured her of his readiness to serve her in things of much greater consequence than what she desired to him. So Beauplessis was completely willing. He was completely willing. He was ready to help her at any cost, you see, and told her it would be an impossibility of denying a place in his chariot to a lady, because it was not, you know, it was not to be considered as ungentlemanly. So somehow it would be an impossibility of denying a place in his chariot to a lady who he could not behold without yielding one in his heart. So kind of a feeling was present in Beauplessis at this moment. She answered the compliments he made her, but with tears, which seemed to stream in such abundance from her eyes. So she was crying at any moment. So these cries, these teardrops, it would obviously melt the heart of Buplasi and create the fertile ground of the sexual pleasures in future. So which seemed to stream in such abundance from her eyes that she could not keep her handkerchief from her face one moment. So each and every moment the handkerchief was used being her. Being come into the chariot, Buplasi said 1,000 handsome things to persuade her from giving way to so violent a grief. So he was trying everything, you see. Some positive words, some energetic words, some actions that he was showing in front of her. But ultimately the violence of grief was not from her, which he told her would not only be destructive to her beauty. Now Uplas is calling her the beautiful woman, and he calls her that ultimately such kind of grief, such violence of passion that she was shedding at this moment in the form of the tears, it could ruin her beauty, but likewise her health, obviously. But all his endeavors for consolement appeared ineffectual. So ultimately, the crying was continuing, the sobbing was continuing, and he began to think he should have but a dull journey in the company of one who seemed so obstinately devoted to the memory of a dead husband that there was no getting a word from her on any other theme. So ultimately, Uplas was thinking that it was a boring journey, a dull journey to commit with the lady who was actually throughout the times, you see, throughout the way, the journey, she will cry and she will completely devoted to her husband, and in memory of the dead husband, she will be completely devoted, and there was no getting a word from her on any other theme except mourning, except melancholy, except crying, and so. But bethinking himself of the celebrated story of the Ephesian matron, so it was a story, you see, that Eliza Haywood is actually taking from Satyricon. It's the Petronius' story, that is, it was written in Petronius. That is, the story originates in Petronius, that was included in Satyricon, and had been adapted in 1659 by Sir Walter Charlton. Okay, in it, what was there in the story? In it, a woman famous of her chastity has sex with a soldier whom she encounters while mourning by the tomb of her recently deceased husband. So, why Eliza Haywood is referring to this particular story? Because in the ancient tale, there was a particular kind of a reference of copulation, the bereaved woman and the copulation between the bereaved woman and a soldier just beside the tomb of her dead husband. So why this particular reference has been taken here? Because by thinking about the story of the Ephesian matron, Beauplessis can think that okay, so he was always thoughtful about the sexual activities, you see, He was an opportunist, and he cannot waste any opportunity of being engaged in such kind of activities. So such kind of a tale, such kind of a story makes him think about the possibility of a kind of a sexual relationship with this woman also, because she was also the bereaved woman. Okay, and she was also thoughtful about her dead husband, or recently dead husband. So that's why there is the reference to the Ephesian matron. It came into his head to make trial. Okay, she would seem equally susceptible to sorrow, that means influenced or maybe damaged by sorrow. Might not also be so too of love. So ultimately the sorrow must have to be changed or transferred into love. And having begun a discourse on almost every other topic, and finding her still incapable of answering. So he was trying everything, you see, but ultimately in each kind of or whenever a new topic arises, you will find that she was incapable of answering. And now Buplessy resolved to put it to a proof if this would have no more effect to rouse her sleeping spirit. With a gay air, therefore, though accompanied with the greatest modesty and respect, he turned the conversation as though without design on the joy-giving passion. So ultimately, now, as if it's a matter of fact thinking, as if Buplessy is changing his topic into sexual activities. So it is the kind of with a gay air. Therefore, though accompanied with the greatest modesty and respect, so he puts modesty, he puts respect in his way of telling the stories about such kind of physical activities. He turned the conversation as though without design, as if it was not his design, but somehow the words, the stories have aroused as a matter of fact way, you see, on that joy-giving passion. Obviously, this joy-giving passion is actually referring to the sexual implications. And soon discovered, now it is something surprising to Plessy, because he soon discovered that was indeed the subject she was best pleased to be entertained with. So this was the subject she was thinking about, probably. So it was a matter of surprise to Plessy, obviously. So on that joy-giving passion, and soon discovered that was indeed the subject she was best pleased to be entertained with. For on his giving her a hint to begin upon, you see, never any tongue ran more voluble than hers. That means on such a kind of a topic, on such kind of a story, you see, her tongue, or never any tongue ran more voluble. Voluble means fluently than hers. On the prodigious power it had to influence the souls of those possessed of it to actions even the most distant from her intentions, principles, or humors. From that, she passed on to description of the happiness of mutual affection. So now she's also thinking about, or she's also telling the stories about some mutual affections, the unspeakable ecstasy of those who meet with equal ardency, that is, equal passion. So you see that the purpose, or maybe the focus of these talk is gradually shifted from the the typical melancholic temperament into some passionate discourses, you see, and represented it in colors so lively and disclosed by the gestures with which her words were accompanied, and the accent of her voice so true a feeling of what she said, that Buplessy, without being as stupid as he was really the contrary, could not avoid perceiving there were seeds of fire, you see, not yet extinguished. So these are actually, the fire is referring to the passions that she did possess at that moment. So there were seeds of fire not yet extinguished in this fair widow's soul, which wanted but the kindling breeze of tender sighs to light into a blaze. So the sparklings have already been rested in her, and there were the possibilities of transforming the sparklings into conflagrations, you see. And Buplessy can identify them. Buplessy can recognize them because it was his habit, it was his temperament to be related with the women. He now thought himself as fortunate, okay, as some moments before he had the reverse. At the very beginning, he thought that he was an unfortunate man to be engaged in such kind of a boring and dull journey. And now he is considering himself fortunate, as some moments before he had the reverse, and doubted not, but that before they parted, he should find a way to dry the tears of this lovely morning. So, how to dry the tears, he was thinking, to the satisfaction of them both. He did not, however, offer as he had done to Phantomina or Celia. Okay, because in both these cases, the matters concerning Phantomina and the matters concerning Celia, you will find the advance movements have been first done by Duplessis, but in this case it was not so. So that's why he said he did not, however, offer as he had done to Phantomina or Celia to urge his passion directly to her, but by a thousand little softening artifices. But now the artificialities, he is creating, he is using some tricks, and these are the softening artifices which he well knew how to use, gave her leave to guess he was enamored. When they came to the inn, now they came to an inn where they were to lie, he declared himself somewhat more freely. Now he is declaring himself freely, and perceiving she did not resent it, past forgiveness grew more encroaching still. He now took the liberty of kissing away her tears. Now he is progressing, he is providing or giving, or took the liberty of kissing her away her tears, and catching the sighs as they used from hurt lips, telling her if grief was infectious, he was resolved to have his share, protesting he would gladly exchange passions with her. So each and every moment you will find that Duplessis is advancing very fast. You see, but here in this case, it is not directly, rather indirectly. It is not the overstatement that he is making. Rather, he is using the tricky words, he is using schemes and artifices very well combed, you see. So therefore, he says that ultimately he was resolved to have his share, protesting he would gladly exchange passions with her and be content to bear her load of sorrow. So he want to be a part of this, sorry situations, the sad and sordidness that she was in. If she would as willingly ease the burden of his love, so ultimately he will take part in these activities, and if she would willingly ease the burden of his love. She said little in answer to these strenuous pressures with which at last he ventured to unfold or enfold her, but not thinking it decent. So here you will find that the lady who is here being referred as the widow, but not thinking it decent for the character she had assumed. So she was also thinking, she was also considering that the character that I am assuming at this moment, it is not proper to disclose my feelings, my temperaments at so first, but not thinking it decent for the character she had assumed to yield so suddenly and unable to deny both his and her own inclinations. So she had to make a balance, right? So to yield so suddenly and unable to deny both his and her own inclinations, she counterfeited a fainting and fell motionless upon his breast. So ultimately, he will find that ultimately she counterfeited a fainting as if she was got fainted and fell motionless upon his breast. He had no great notion that she was in a real fit, and the room they supped in happening to have a bed in it. So there was a kind of a bed. He took her in his arms and laid her on it, believing that whatever her distemper was, that was the most proper place to convey her to. And he laid himself down by her and endeavored to bring her to herself. And she was too grateful to her kind physician at her returning sense to remove from the posture he had put her in without his leave. It perhaps seems strange that Duplessis should insert, here you will find that in this particular paragraph, uh, somehow Eliza Haywood is providing the justification to the questions aroused regarding the impossibility of not recognizing a body of one so well. Because you will find that somehow there was ample references, or there were ample references where we can find that Beauplessis had copulated with the lady, okay, either in the form of Antomina or maybe Celia. But ultimately, how can it be possible that in such a kind of a you know you know uh, a close distance, ultimately, or maybe a close proximity, Beauplessis cannot identify, Beauplessis cannot recognize this lady, okay, that is the widow, from or maybe cannot find the similarities between the lady and Phantomina and Celia and so. So here you can get the justification that she is making in this particular paragraph. It has been made sure. It may perhaps seem strange, so Eliza Haywood providing justification. She says, it may perhaps seem strange that Beauplessis should in such near intimacies, so it's a kind of an intimate relationship that have been taken into consideration, intimacies continue still deceived. I know there are men. Now, it is the narrator's choice, it is the author's words. I know there are men who will swear it is an impossibility, because it is impossible, surely, that the people will think of, and that no disguise could hinder them from knowing a woman they had once enjoyed. So ultimately, there were multiple occasions where you can find that the physical proximities are there, the physical intimacies were there, and ultimately, after committing sex, how can it be possible for a man not to recognize a woman body? So, in answer to these scruples, Eliza Haywood is providing the answer. In answer to these scruples, I can only say, besides the alteration which the change of dress made in her. So it was the first thing, that is the alteration in the alteration have been made in the change of dress made in her. She was so admirably skilled in the art of feigning. That is, the role playing. Obviously, she was skilled in role playing. That she had the power of putting on almost what face she pleased. So the facial expressions have got changed along with the new attires that Eliza Haywood is proposing here or justifying here. She says, therefore, that she was so admirably skilled in the art of feigning that she had the power of putting on almost what face she pleased, and knew so exactly how to form her behavior to the character she represented. That means the patterns, the behaviors, the airs have to be changed along with the characters that she is presenting. That all the comedians at both playhouses, both playhouse, it signifies actors in the comedy staged by the licensed theatres at Drury Lanes and the Covent Garden, sorry, in London. So that all the comedians at both playhouses are infinitely short of her performances. She could vary her very glances. That means she could change her glances, her looks, tune her voices to accents the most different imaginable. That means the accents have got changed along with them from those in which she spoke when she appeared herself. That means the accents or the words or maybe the way of she was using the language, it got changed in case of Phantomina and Celia and maybe this widow. So she could vary her very glances, tune her voice to accents the most different imaginable from those in which she spoke when she appeared herself. These aids from nature, joined to the wiles of art, and the distance between the places, you see. So the places where he met Phantomina and Celia, and now Widow Bloomer. So the places are almost, you see, the distance between places where the imagined Phantomina and Celia were might very well prevent his having any thought that they were the same, or that the fair widow was either of them. Okay, so that was the kind of a justification that Eliza Haywood is putting. Uh, so that's why she says that the distance between the places where the imagined Phantomina and Celia were might very well prevent his having any thought that they were the same, or that the fair widow was either of them. It never so much as entered his head. And though he did fancy he observed in the face of the letter features which were not altogether unknown to him, yet he could not recollect when or where he had known them. That means the features, it is the bodily features ultimately. He had encountered them, he had uh, got the experience of them, but ultimately he cannot identify that where I have experienced them also. And being told by her that from her birth she had never removed from Bristol, Bristol, the place where they lived actually, a place where he never was, he rejected the belief of having seen her. Okay, and supposed his mind had been deluded by an idea of some other whom she might have a resemblance of. So ultimately, these are the things, these are the lists actually that have been made by Eliza Haywood that to some extent persuaded uh, Beauplessis to think that this lady was far from uh, being the other ladies, that means Phantomina and Celia. They passed the time of the journey in as much happiness as the most luxurious gratification of wild desires could make them. So that means these are actually implicating towards the sexual references. And when they came to the end of it, parted not without a mutual promise. So it was a kind of a promise of seeing each other often. He told her to what place she would direct a letter to him. So ultimately, she had given a particular address where the letter can be written, and she assured him she would send to let him know where to come to her as soon as she was fixed in lodgings. She kept her promise, and charmed with the continuance of his eager fondness, that means the infatuation that she was feeling, went not home, but into private lodgings, when she wrote to him to visit her the first opportunity and inquire for the widow Bloomer. So that was the name that she was assuming at this moment. She had no sooner dispatched this billet. Billet is the term, it means letter. It's love letter, obviously. Then she repaired to the house where she had lodged as Phantomina, charging the people, if Beauplessis should come there, not to let him know she had been out of town. So now she is preparing also, and she is thoughtful that if it might be possible that Beauplessis will return to the particular lodge, the particular place where Phantomina actually residing, and he informs or he instructs, she instructs her maids or maybe the owner of that lodging that not to disclose the particular incident or not to disclose the particular information to Beauplessis that she was completely absent from this town for so long. So charging the people, if Beauplessis should come there, not to let him know she had been out of town. From thence, she wrote to him in a different hand a long letter of complaint that he had been so cruel in not sending one letter to her all the time he had been absent. So now such kind of a letter was been written under the name of Phantomina. So cruelly not sending one letter to her all the time he had been absent, entreated to see him, and concluded with subscribing herself his unalterably affectionate Phantomina. So it was the name that she was also mentioning. She received in one day answers to both these. The first contained these lines. So the first letter was written to Mrs. Bloomer, that is the widow Bloomer, that the third role that she was assuming. And the second letter was written to the lovely Phantomina, you see. So both letters have been written at a time and have been posted since. So the first letter, it was addressed to the charming Mrs. Bloomer. And what was there? It was written in this fashion: it would be impossible, my angel, for me to express the thousandth part of that infinity of transport the sight of your dear letter gave me. So ultimately, the letter, it was so inspiring. It was so, pleasurable. So these kinds of, the high-flown oratorial verses have been imposed by Beauplessis and written there. Never was woman formed to charm like you. So you are an unimperiled woman. So never was woman formed so to charm or to charm like you. It means you are the charming woman. You are the most charming woman I have ever encountered. Never did any look like you, write like you, bless like you, nor did ever man adore as I do. That means it is completely unprecedented. Since yesterday we parted, I have seemed a body without a soul. So now these are the, uh, you know, to some extent, ceremonious way of representing one's feeling. And had you not by this inspiring delay, that is the letter, gave me new life, I know not what by tomorrow I should have been. So it might be possible that if I not received that particular letter from you, it may be possible that I would be dead. I don't know how can it be possible, but ultimately he is writing this. I will be with you this evening about 5. So now he's providing a particular time, he's giving a time. So I will be with you this evening about 5. Oh, it is an age till then, so it is a long time to wait. But the cursed formalities of duty oblige me to dine with my lords. So altogether, the lies that he's stating at this moment. But the cursed formalities of duty oblige me to dine with my lord, who never rises from table till that hour. Therefore, adieu. That means goodbye. Till then, sweet, lovely mistress of the soul, and all the faculties of your most faithful Beauplessis. So it was the first letter you see, and you can identify the language, the particular kind of a language that he is using and assuming. Okay, and the lies that he's stating, these are appropriate for such kinds of love letters or billets, obviously. The other letter, the other one, was in this manner, and it was addressed to the lovely Phantomina. And what was written there? If you were half so sensible as you ought of your own power of charming, you would be assured that to be unfaithful or unkind to you would be among the things that are in their very nature's impossibilities. So now, to some extent, you will find that Buplas is also justifying his absence. So he says, therefore, that if you were half so sensible, that if you have the sense as you ought of your own power of charming, you would be assured that to be unfaithful or unkind to you would be among the things that are in their very nature's impossibilities. So that means I am not unfaithful, I am not unkind to you. That means your thoughts have always or had always been with me. So now another lie or another kind of lies you see. It was my misfortune, not my fault, that you were not persecuted every post with the declaration of my unchanging passion. So he discloses here, therefore, that it was my misfortune, it was not my fault, that you were not persecuted every post with the declaration of my unchanging passion. That means I have already written the letters to you, but I had unluckily forgot the name of the woman at whose house you were. So I don't know where to post it. So that is the problem. And knew not how to form a direction that it might come safe to your hands. And indeed, the reflection how you might misconstrue, that is, misunderstand my silence. So ultimately, it is something very problematic to me that you have misunderstood my uh, my silence. Okay, that is, misunderstand my silence. Brought me to town some weeks sooner than I intended, and I have arrived at this particular town. If you knew how I have languished to renew those blessings I am permitted to enjoy in your society, you would rather pity than condemn. And you're ever faithful, Beauplessis. And that was the letter. So ultimately, you will find that Beauplessis that doesn't want to miss any of the chances, you see. Okay? And there was a PS in a postscript. What written? I fear I cannot see you till tomorrow. Some business has unluckily fallen out that will engross my hours till then. Once more, my dear, adieu. So in this particular postscript, he has declared that it is not possible for him to meet Phantomina, you see, on that particular day. Why? Because he had already arranged the meeting with Widow Bloomer, right? So after reading these two letters at a time, you will find somehow of what is being thought, what is thought by uh, the lady. The lady says the first word she utters, traitor, cried she, as soon as she had read them. It is thus our silly, fond, believing sex are served when they put faith in man. So now you will find that through the words of a lady, Eliza Haywood is to some extent condemning, Eliza Haywood is to some extent critiquing the nature of the fashionable 18th century woman. Uh, she says, therefore, that it is thus our silly, fond, believing sex are served when they put faith in man. So had I been deceived and cheated, had I, like the rest, believed and sat down mourning in absence. So here in this particular segment, you will find that Eliza Haywood is almost critical about the general tendencies of the women regarding such a kind of regarding or their temperament, their behavior, what they actually did in the face of such kind of cheating and so. Okay, and as I've already discussed, already mentioned, that somehow these are the general attributes that have been vested on a woman, and these have been portrayed by the traditional novelists of that particular time. And Eliza Haywood is deliberately discarding them, that I don't want to be in such kind of grief, such kind of sadness, just because my beloved or my lover has duped me or cheated me. So I will not sit alone and cry. So what she thinks, had I like the rest believed and sat down mourning in absence and vainly waiting recovered tenderness, how do some women, continued she, make their life a hell? So these are actually the things that Eliza Haywood is critiquing. Why? Because these are actually referring to the traditional patterns of showing a woman being duped by her lover and putting her life into some hellish businesses, you see. So how do some women make their life a hell? Burning in fruitless expectations and dreaming out their days in hopes and fears, then wake at last to all the horror of despair. So these are the things you see. What it says that make their life a hell, number one, burning in fruitless expectation, always they are in thoughts, they are in expectation that somehow uh, it might be possible that in near future they will be united again or reunited again rather, and dreaming out their days in hopes and fears. Ultimately, the hopes and fears are altogether present in them. Then wake at last to all the horror of despair. That means nothing actually happens to them, nothing positive, nothing fruitful actually happens to them. And in that particular note of despair, in a horror of despair rather, they leave their remaining lives or maybe commit suicide. But I have outwitted even the most subtle of the deceiving kind. So that it says actually. So that I have outwitted even the most subtle of the deceiving kind, and while he thinks to fool me, is himself the only beguiled person. That means though Beauplassy is considering himself to be the most, intelligent person, and he is befooling others, befooling the other woman or other women, but ultimately he himself will be the only beguiled person. That means he will not only deceiving us, rather I will deceive him, and she is actually deceiving him. She made herself most certainly extremely happy in the reflection on the success of her stratagems. She could identify the strategies are bearing fruits at this moment, and while the knowledge of his inconstancy and levity, that is, the lack of seriousness that is being proposed here. And while the knowledge of his inconstancy and levity, that is, lack of seriousness of nature, kept her from having that real tenderness from him she would else have had, she found the means of gratifying the inclination she had for his agreeable person in as full a manner as she could wish. Okay, so these are referring to her actions and her patterns of duping him. She had all the sweets of love, but as yet had tasted none of the girl. So each and every moment she had faced different sweets of love, but as yet had tasted none of the girl. Girl means here venom or bitterness, and was in a state of contentment which might be envied by the more delicate. So up to this, you will find that somehow Widow Bloomer is actually preparing for another journey. She's scheming how to uh, control Buplasi and keep Buplasi under the love in a maze, you see. Okay, so how this particular kind of situation comes to the forefront, what happens to her, and what is the next disguise that she will use. It will be discussed in our next lecture. So today, up to this, go through the text and listen the video lecture carefully. Thank you.